and manage with that disease. So I'm Jonathan, lovely to be here again, and I am a clinical nurse specialist. I've worked in this field for decades. I'm passionate about it, and I worked in cognitive health and all over sort of neurology. So this is an area that's very close to my heart. And I set up a social enterprise that is in Exmouth on Withycombe Village Road that is all about helping families and to understand and to live and to cope with this illness. So come and find me afterwards. We've got lots going on. So today I'm going to be talking about dementia. Okay, so dementia is, and forgive me if I'm standing in the middle of it. Dementia is a neurodegenerative disease. It affects. This is the World Health Organization. It affects you physically, psychologically, socially, economically, and its carers, its families, and society. And the reason I did that quote is because dementia is a very, very, very rare illness in healthcare, in the fact that it isn't the doctors, it isn't the surgeons, it isn't the people in the hospitals that support and help and treat and look after these people. It is the community, it is us, it is those, it is solved and treated and supported through multiple people across a community. Some of them are professionals, some of them are working in the community, and some of them are just there to support and help. So unlike cancer, unlike cardiac disease, unlike other illnesses that are all treated often in the hospital, this is treated by us, this is treated in the community, and it needs everyone involved. And so the more we understand it, the more we are sort of knowledgeable about it, the better we are able to help families and friends and loved ones with this. So for me, that's very rare, and what draws me to it, why I love it so much, working in this field. So, bear with me. So we're going to talk a bit about the early signs. So that early stages where you're thinking, does this person have dementia? Do they not? What's going on? Should I get a diagnosis? Should I not get a diagnosis? And then I'm going to talk a little bit about why that's important to get a diagnosis or to recognize those signs and symptoms. And then I'm also going to switch a little bit to some of the behaviors that are noticeable and people have to deal with in the later stages of this. So I'm going to start at the beginning, and then I'm going to jump forward to some of those behaviors that can be a bit of a challenge, just to give some people some tips and some ideas on how to deal with some of the more challenging symptoms that can occur with this. So, and feel free, and so we'll have time for questions at the end, so feel free. So forgive me, I'm going to go over a little bit that I talked about last September, but I'm sure people will may not remember. So there are four things that we typically, dementia is an umbrella term. It just has an umbrella term for all things that are to do with degenerative mind. So dementia is out of mind. And the four key types of dementia, the four most common, are vascular dementia, Alzheimer's, frontotemporal dementia, and Lewy bodies dementia. And they're very, very different in how they present and how we might treat and support people who have those. But I think it's important to recognize that we use the word dementia as an umbrella term, but there are a huge number of subtypes. And there are a whole lot of other subtypes that are more rare. And there are genetic Alzheimer's, and there's familial, and then there's late onset Alzheimer's. So we often lump them all together in this umbrella term, but it's worth us remembering that they're each very unique in how they present and how we treat them. Now, I do a one-day course that teaches you all about every type of dementia and everything else. I'm not going to go into detail today because I don't have a lot of time. But if you're interested, if you want to learn more about this, then feel free to sign up to the course we run, which gives you a much more in-depth understanding of everything we're talking about today. So, just like last time, I believe in the idea that you need to try and visualize what's happening in our brains. Because unlike a broken arm or a bad hip or arthritis, we can't see dementia. It's happening in our heads without any of us being able to actually visually see it. So I think it's always important for us to sort of almost try to visualize what's going on so that we're better able to empathically, understand that person and what they're dealing with. Okay, so I'm going to start with a very simple biology, hopefully, a little biology lesson. Okay, so we have about 80 billion neurons in our head. Huge number of neurons in our head. And each neuron is made up of a cell at the top, a lovely axon, a bit like a tree trunk, and then what we call dendrites. So a little bit like either branches in a tree or roots in the ground. And they come together and they come very, very close to each other. And we get something called the synaptic cleft. So where two neurons almost touch, the dendrites are almost speaking, and we have a neurochemical exchange, and we suddenly are able to understand memories or understand concepts or language or logical thinking. And each part of our brain manages a different area. So we have the parietal lobe, we have the temporal lobes, we have the frontal temporal lobes, and they're each dealing with a little bit of something different. But our brain is incredible. It can understand and deal with pretty much everything. So although the temporal lobe might normally deal with memory and the occipital lobe might deal with vision, they can both do the same thing. If they need to, every part of our brain can do every job it needs to do. So with some types of dementia, we have a protein. And this protein is a bit like hard plaque. It sort of builds up and up and up into a hard plaque. And this protein comes along the sides of the cell and around this area, and it starts to build and build and build and stop the communication between two neurons. And secondly, it stops the energy that we need, the electrical charge that's needed for the cell to be able to produce information, produce those neurochemical transmitters, and send the information from one neuron to the other. So an Alzheimer's protein starts to reduce the ability for the electrical charge to come up to the cell, for the cell to communicate with the next one, and for information to pass through our brain. And as that happens, more and more, the electrical charge finds it harder and harder to get through until that cell slowly stops working and stops being able to produce information and communicate with its next door neighbor and its next cell. And this happens all the time as we're growing older. But as the Alzheimer's continues, you can see large and large parts of our brain being damaged by this protein build-up and not being able to speak. We have 80 billion neurons, so we can cope with huge amounts of damage to our brain and still continue to manage very, very well. But over time, as the proteins continue to build up, we will see changes and damage caused to our brain that we can't turn back. So the damage is done, and we can't necessarily change that damage. But the good news is that our brain is incredibly plasticity. It has the ability to learn and change and use new pathways to gain more information. So although we might see damage in one part of our brain, another part of our brain can learn and use their pathway to be able to continue to speak or continue to gain information or continue to think and come up with ideas. So the key thing I always start with is one is visualizing how that brain gets damaged, how that protein builds up and starts to stop the neuron being able to speak to its neighbor. And then secondly, the idea that that doesn't matter to a degree. Our brain can continue to learn, can continue to find new ways to communicate and to send information. But it's a bit like a muscle. Unless we're continually pushing it and trying to pull new ways of learning, then it's not going to be as strong or be as resilient. So I sort of start with that visual idea of the neuron and the cell body and how that is damaged, and also how the brain has many functions. So it has some parts of the brain look after our vision, other parts might look after our language, our memory. The other part looks after problem solving, the frontal temporal area, and what we call executive function. And the other parts, the parietal lobe, might look after sensory work or movement. And each type of dementia can start in different parts of our brain and therefore make impact on different areas of our body or different parts of our ability. So, we're starting with the idea that that cell being damaged by the protein buildups. And we say, okay, so what are the signs? What are we thinking about here? What do we need to keep our eyes out for to recognize something called dementia versus something called mild cognitive impairment? And also just the normal aging process. So the challenge for us is that in Devon today, our diagnosis rate for dementia is around 56% and dropping. So almost 50% of people are undiagnosed or missed or not recognized by their GPs. And this needs to come up to the national average, which is closer to 70%. We are also seeing about around 3 years for us to recognize those symptoms of dementia and then get to a clinic and actually get a diagnosis. So there's about a 3-year lag in which we know that person has some mild dementia, and yet we're not getting that diagnosis and that support. And that's crucial. So if you were to think about cancer or cardiac disease, if you waited 3 years, that would be a serious delay and a serious lag. So there's an opportunity that we're missing. And a lot of the research and a lot of the work that's going in, not just in Exeter University, but across the UK, is around how do you capture the individual before they reach the memory clinic, and how do we prevent or delay further deterioration? So that idea of prevention, and that's what really interests me, and I think that's an excitement. So the diagnostics, pre-diagnostic signs of dementia are subtle. Obviously, that's why we don't often go to the GP, and often the GP wrongly will say, "Oh, it's just normal aging, just normal part of aging," and they're often reluctant to diagnose too early. They'll say, "Oh, come back in a year, come back later when you're seeing some signs," and actually we're missing that chance of actually recognizing and doing something. So they can be, as I said, they can be seen even years in advance, and these are the key warning signs we're looking for. So the first one, often the first sign is something called semantic fluency. So the first sign that our brain is not working quite as well as it could be is when we're struggling with our semantic fluency. And that is our language, our ability to come up with multiple words, categorize those words, process them, bring them up fast. So the test that is often done is, can you think of 10 animals? And they have to categorize those 10 animals, and then they might say, can you subcategorize those? Can you say 10 animals in farm animals? Can you do 10 sea animals? But it's the ability to come up with words fluently, quickly, and categorize those words. It's the ability to come up with concepts. So the idea of the concept of democracy, or the concept of working life in Britain, things like that. And it's the ability to use a large number of words. So we use thousands, tens of thousands of words, and as your semantic fluency gets worse, the number of words we use or quickly can find reduces as well. And it's the last thing is the idea of being able to retrieve that information relatively fast. So it's subtle. Quite often, the individual might recognize it, and their loved one will recognize it. But to a stranger or the rest of the family, they won't really see necessarily anything going on. And it's a small change, but it's a crucial one. And some of the early assessments are now just focused on how we measure semantic fluency. So the first sign we're looking at is language, semantic fluency language. The second sign is memory. And what I'd say is, this is not memory of, oh, I've lost my keys, or I just walked into this room and I can't remember why I walked into the room, and I can't. I can't remember that person's name, even though I met them last week. Those are all just part of our life. It's just normal things. This is a higher than normal forgetfulness. So these are around recent events or recent conversations, or someone might say something and we're going to be doing this, and then 10 minutes later, you just really can't remember, and you ask the same question again. It's repetition of language and stories. So you have a nice story and you repeat it 3 or 4 times and you don't quite realize that you've said it to the same person at the same time, several times over. It's the loss of objects, and I'm saying loss of several objects. So it's not the loss of keys, but it's the loss of multiple objects all the time in very weird and wonderful places. So you might go and put, I don't know, your ham in the sock drawer or something like that. So you'll do some strange things of placing objects in places they shouldn't really be, and then forget you put them there and forget your object. So and then obviously it's forgetfulness around everyday objects. So you know that the chair has 4 legs, you know it's for sitting on, you know it, put it around the table, but I can't for the life of me remember what the word chair is. So it's sort of finding that it's falling out of your head of simple words that represent, and that connects with your semantic fluency, ability of language. And then it's planning ahead, so complex planning. Well, not complex, but planning. So declining the planning of complex tasks. So that, again, that idea where you might have several things happening and you've got to make sure that they all happen on that particular day, and we must make sure we get to this place then, and then we're going to meet this person, and then we're going to do this, this, and this. And suddenly that becomes very difficult for the individual. And they really struggle without prompts or somebody right next to them giving them a little hint and things like that to be able to manage so complex tasks. Following recipes, following plans, making holiday plans or jobs that have multiple steps to them. So it's planning ahead and dealing with multi-step tasks. And that's often because that's something that has to be thought in advance, and that happens in your frontal temporal lobe. So you're having to imagine a situation, understand what will be needed in that situation, and then plan ahead for what you're going to need. And that takes quite a lot of executive function and is quite complex. And therefore you feel a bit of a reduction in initiative. You might not want to go out so much. You might feel a bit demotivated. And all of these are quite easily battered away by the individual who might not want to believe it or want to understand, and easily forgiven by the loved one who's alongside them. And so for some time you can make excuses, or we can put our heads in the sand, or and sometimes it takes another person coming into the house and visiting to suddenly sort of go, oh, that's very different to what it was. It's a little bit like when you're watching your hair grow. You don't really see it, but suddenly you've got long hair. Similarly, when the cognitive signs are starting to grow, for a long time you're living within them, and therefore you're not necessarily recognizing them, and someone comes along and sees them more fully. So semantic fluency, memory, planning ahead, those are all signs that we have early stages of dementia. So why should we be on the alert? Why should we worry about them? And why should we be on the and recognize them rather than forgiving them or ignoring them or placing our heads in the sand? And I think one of the big things I always try and myth bust is that treatment works. So there's a narrative often said that this disease, once it's got, there is nothing we can do, and it's just life, and we're just going to have to stick our head in the sand and just deal with it. And when it gets to a crisis, we'll deal with the crisis. And that's just not true. As I said at the beginning, our brain is incredible. It's elasticated, it learns, it continues to learn at every single stage of our life. But it needs work, it needs conscious work to continue to learn and continue to grow. So and I feel like I'm talking to the choir here, so we need to constantly be learning and thinking and trying to put ourselves in new situations. So I'm going to concentrate very briefly on non-pharmacological intervention. There's a whole other sort of conversation about some of the drugs that you can use at the early stages, where if you were to recognize early dementia, the GP was to be proactive, then we can start certain medication a bit earlier, and that can help too. But I'll do that for another day. Today, I want to just very briefly concentrate on what we can do when we do see early signs. And again, what I'd say is this is a bigger topic than just a 10-minute conversation. So if you are interested in these things, then feel free to come along to a one-day session on this. And I touched on these in September, because it's not necessarily changes from when you have mild cognitive impairment. And again, just in case you did harking back to September, there's a big difference between what we call MCI and dementia. Mild cognitive impairment affects around 2 million people today in the UK. It is a recognized degenerative disease that is different to dementia. And about 40% of people who have MCI will deteriorate and progress into dementia, but only about 40%. The rest will continue to be at their MCI. And we can work very well within MCI to delay or stop further progression. Dementia is a bit different. So we can't stop dementia, as we know, but we can delay deterioration. And there was a very recognized Lancet report last year that suggested that if we do work and try to modify our behaviors, actively work to challenge our brains, then we will be able to maintain and stop progression, further deterioration and progression for long periods of time. And this is key because there are two pathways that somebody living with dementia has, two very distinct pathways. And for me, this is crucial. So you have the ability to put your head in the sand, to say this is a natural part of aging and I don't have any choice and it's just going to happen and we're going to pretend it's not there and I'm going to watch lots of telly and I'm just going to sit there and you will see your brain deteriorate at a much faster rate. Well, there's also the second pathway for dementia. And I hasten to add, this is dementia. This is recognized neurodegenerative disease. You can see a maintenance of ability, maintenance of cognitive function for a long period of time before there is then a drop-off, because this is a palliative illness, as we understand, so before we see a drop-off. And in Dutch, the majority of the people living with dementia will see this pathway. And in England, the majority of people sit on this pathway. And there is an inequality of life, in ability, in fulfillment of life that can continue while living with this illness and disease. But it takes, going back to that concept of community, it takes the entire community to do that with them and to be a part of that journey and to actively support that. It isn't, as a professional, if someone works in it, I can only ever do a little part of that journey, and my area of expertise is here, what we call proactive services, integrated services, helping to stimulate and improve and maintain and advise people on how they can help their brains. So I genuinely think this is understated in the press, in the research things, that we have a choice at the beginning of our journey in this dementia. And we have a choice where we can maintain ourselves, or we have a choice where with good intention, without meaning to, we can see a more rapid decline. So that's the area I work in. So when I came and talked in September, I talked in quite a lot of detail about how to improve your brain, ways in which we can make a change and look after our brains. And I didn't want to this time just repeat what I said in September, because I actually believe you do remember all of that in September. So I don't want to spend too long on this, and I'm also very aware that I might be told that I've run out of time. So I'm only going to go sort of briefly, and again, I will very happy to. I do this in a lot of depth in the course that I run. But there are 3 areas that we have to work on when we have early dementia. The first is what we call modifying our behaviours, and that follows a range of information. That's organic, so that's our hearing, it's our heart, that's our eyesight. It's also things like sleep, so maybe taking magnesium or ensuring that we have a good sleep hygiene and ensuring that we get to bed and we have a good full 7 hours. It's about eating and making sure that we have a varied and decent diet. It's about exercise, as you, I'm sure, all know and agree, whether that's just having a short walk each day or whether it's going to a balance class or whatever it might be, but it's exercising and moving our bodies. So it's having a hobby. So it's doing something creative, something that inspires us and gets us thinking. And that can be anything from mosaic class to cookery class. It could be anything, but all of those things is changing our behaviors to improve or sustain our mental health and our mental ability. And I cannot emphasize enough the ability to hear. So we often don't get our hearing aid updated, or our hearing gets worse, but there is a very strong and clear correlation between hearing and a reduction in cognitive ability. So modifying behaviors. So that's everything that's physical, everything that's about doing things in the day and keeping healthy. And I think everyone here sort of knows those. The second is, again, I'm sure I'm talking to the choir here, but it's about being and forcing yourself into those social situations. And again, if you recall my previous slide, when you have early signs of dementia, the exact opposite begins. What you actually want to do is stay at home, and you don't want to particularly put yourself, and you're undermotivated, and you're nervous of social situations. And so you actually make excuses. You say, actually, I don't really want to go to that group, or I'm not feeling so good, or because actually what you're scared of is, I can't remember the person's name, or I don't think I'm going to remember what's going on, or I might be put in a social situation where I can't cope. But what your brain needs and needs desperately is increase in social situations. And that can be anything, from a one-to-one coffee morning to learning a language, to going to Bath on a day trip, to whatever it might be. It's so important that we're forcing the individual that we love and live with to continue to force them into awkward social situations. And sometimes that might be that they need to go to such situations that are professional, that have someone who understands how their communication might be impaired, how they might not be able to talk as well. But other times it's just going for a dog walk or doing whatever you want. But it is incredibly important, and yet sometimes we go along with our loved one and agree not to go out or not to force ourselves into these situations. And then the third one, and I talked a bit about this in September, but and says again, it's conscious cognitive stimulation. And I use the word conscious very, very importantly, because we all maybe do Sudoku, we all maybe do a puzzle here and there, we all occasionally say, oh, well, I keep myself busy, I do this. But actually, I'd almost like describe this as physiotherapy for your brain, or having a personal trainer for your brain, or it's taking a step from a nice hobby to keep myself active to recognizing I have a broken hip or I have a cognitive impairment, and therefore I'm going to actively seek stimulation of my brain. And that sometimes requires a professional like myself. We run cognitive group-based work to try and help maintain people's brain. And other times it's seeking out a specific task every day for 40 minutes. So, okay, once a day, I might be doing my balance class, but I'm also going to add to that, I'm going to do 30 minutes of arithmetic practice, or I'm going to do the hang bridge, or I'm going to do something. But it's that change between, I like to do this because it's a hobby, to I know I've got some cognitive impairment issue, and I'm going to actually actively engage with a professional or a specialist, or I'm actively going to engage with a routine that constant. So I've got behaviours that I'm going to change. I've got an increase in my social life and social situation, and this is the individual with dementia, and I'm going to actively, consciously seek cognitive stimulation. And if we can do those three things in a great enough deal regularly, for years, I'm afraid, for a long period, then we know that we can hold and maintain our cognitive function. And the really expensive part of this disease is down here, because that's obviously complex care that needs residential care or domiciliary care. So we want to delay this period of time for as long as we possibly can and have us on this lovely, strong line. So, and some, Japan, Holland, Canada, have just done it. They are so far ahead of us in this area than we are, because they recognise that our brain is plasticity and can deal with this. Well, we're still struggling and this is more about our government and our local NHS and our GPs, because we're struggling to recognise those early years and the opportunity that we have in those early years. Okay, I hope do tell me if I run out of time, because I could talk briefly. Okay, so where are we? So that's the summary of part one, really quickly, just a summary. So that if I could take away two messages today, it would be, don't ignore the signs. You don't have to get a diagnosis, but if you understand the signs and you recognize that this is moved from just being some age-related issues or mild issues to something that we recognize as dementia, challenge the symptoms. Begin to do something about them. Consciously stimulate. And the second thing I'd say is, when you've been diagnosed, or when you're diagnosed, look for treatment. Don't sit and wait for social services to come along, or a domiciliary care company, or a crisis. But seek out those three things. Because all too often what I see is that families and individuals say, well, I got a diagnosis, no one came and helped me, I didn't get any information, I didn't get anyone who did anything, and 5 years went past, and then I had a complete collapse. I was exhausted, I was burnt out, I couldn't cope as a carer, and I called in social services and we collapsed. And actually there's an opportunity that we've missed, that we're missing in that middle section, and that's a community opportunity. It doesn't take a professional necessarily, it takes us all to do that, but it's a real opportunity, and I think that's takeaway from the first round. Okay. Fast forward. So we're fast forwarding now. So that was the only thing. Once we do have a recognized dementia and we progression in that dementia, then we have symptoms and behaviors that can be challenging. Now, I would hasten to add that out of every single person that has dementia, whether it's diagnosed or not diagnosed, only about 20% go on to exhibit behaviors that can be so challenging that they require professional involvement, they require us to be involved, really get involved. So 80% of people will not have those. So there's a misunderstanding sometimes in the community that someone with dementia is always going to get aggressive, or they're going to have that so confused, or they're going to get really anxious, or they're going to, and you know, it's going to be a nightmare. That isn't the case actually. Most of the time, we can manage behaviors and symptoms quite comfortably and easily. That said, almost everyone does have some behavior changes and some symptoms that can be challenging for people. And we use the language quite carefully. So we describe things that behaviors that challenge rather than challenging behaviors. And that's because one behavior for one person is a challenge, and for another person, it's a gift. So a good example, for instance, is apathy is a really difficult symptom to deal with. And that's if you're a husband or a wife and the other loved one has deep apathy, that means they're sitting at home in the chair or in there, and you know that's bad for them. You can't go out because they're there, you can't leave them, and you're worried about them. And suddenly your life has been restricted to a huge degree, and that can be very challenging for that individual. On the other side, apathy within a nursing home or a residential home is not that challenging for them. They don't have to be, they've got 24-hour care, they've got people coming and going. That person can sit quietly and not be a challenge. So we use behavior that challenges just because each behavior is different. Right. So the key is that we have to look at any behavior in context. So the question I always say, the comments I always say is that actually no one behaves out of context. It's just that each individual's context is radically shifted. And so sometimes we have to understand the context in which somebody is living to recognize that the behavior that they're showing is correct and real in their situation. And once you recognize their context, then you can start to work within that context yourself and hopefully make a change. So it's important with every single symptom or behavior to recognize the biology of it, the psychology of it, and the social or environmental impact on it. And try to understand the context in which that is happening. And then you can shift it, or you can recognize it, or you can empathize with that person and be far, far more compassionate. So, biological. It's obvious biological because that's what's going on in their body. I'll come back to that. Psychological is fascinating in many ways, and again, something I talk about at great length in the course. But effectively, we are, all of us, all us humans, led by four things. This is what the research says anyway. We all need to believe in ourselves. We all need to have self-esteem. We all need to think, I am worthy and I am good. And I'm worth being here. But secondly, you need agency. You need to feel like you're in control of your life. You can get out of bed and make the decision to have breakfast or not to have breakfast, or to go out or not to go out. You have to feel that you're in control. Otherwise, it's terrifying. You need social confidence to a level. You need to be able to confidently speak to another person and not feel intimidated or scared or awkward. So you need a level of social confidence to be able to go out and see people and meet people and be a part of society. And that's so helpful for our brains. And the last thing is you need hope. So we all need to believe that we're going to win the Euro Millions. No, I'm joking. We all need to believe that we can see something good in the next day, that the next day will be okay, that the next day and the next day, the next day will continue to be okay. And it's not, there isn't a hopelessness to our lives. And if any one of those four things happens to any one of us, then we suffer from mental health illness. So we either get anxious, or we feel depressed, or we become upset or angry or frustrated, or whichever number of things happens to us. And that occurs for someone with dementia even more so. Because if you take a moment to think about someone who's living with a cognitive impairment that's stopping them from being able to think properly, suddenly they're questioning themselves. They're saying, well, what's my worth? Why am I here? I can't even remember that person's name, and I feel terrified every time I leave the door. And also my wife or husband is telling me to do everything. She's telling me when to get up and when to go to bed and how to do this and where to dress and what to do. And my sense of control and agency has been taken from me. Well-meaning, but it has been taken, and I no longer feel. And I feel scared because I don't know what that person's name is. And I can't read the room, and I can't see if they're smiling or if they're frowning. And therefore, I don't want to go outside, I don't want to see people. And therefore, what's the point of happening tomorrow? And so that deep sense of fear just starts bubbling up and is incredibly tough, really hard for people. So the biology, the psychology, and the environment, the social side of things. So I'm going to give you a quick example. So if we, a not uncommon one is washing, having a shower or bath. So quite often if someone has dementia, they might say, no, I'm not going to have a bath, or I'm not going to wash. And that can be very difficult to deal with, a challenge for somebody, because obviously we need to be clean, and it's good for our health. So you've got to think about why is that happening? What might be stopping them? The biology of it. So the biology is that sometimes logic and planning in your frontal executive lobe has been impaired. So your ability for somebody to say to you, I think it's a good idea if you have a bath because it's going to help you stay healthy. It's going to stop you getting nits or whatever it might be, and it's important. But you can't logically argue with that because your ability to argue has been impaired, and you can't say, well, yes, I agree with you, but actually I prefer to have a bath tomorrow because it's a bit cold and I'm thinking tomorrow will be a better day. You can't do that. So, but what you can do is control yourself. And you're feeling out of control. So the other thing you think about is their psychology. Keep on telling me what to do, when to have a bath, what to have. I want a shower, I don't want a shower. And you're telling me, and I feel out of control. And the only thing I can do to feel in control is to say no. I can't tell you why, but I can say no. Or I can say yes. So you therefore will say no. And that feeling of agency is being stripped from you. And I know that the other person's getting frustrated and angry with me, but the only thing I can control is what I can say. I'm going to say no. And then the third thing is the social and environmental. I always have a bath. My granny, when she passed away a few years back, but she was a creature of habit, and she loved a bath at 10 p.m. She would have it all every single day. She would have her 10 p.m. when she would have her bath. And then she'd go to bed straight after that. And if someone had come into her and said, well, we're going to have a shower at 7 o'clock in the morning when you get up before you get dressed, she couldn't have understood that. She would be like, why? I have my bath at 10 p.m. and that's when I have my bath. And suddenly, just because I have dementia, another person, often maybe a dominant care or someone's coming along and saying, well, it suits me if you get in the shower now so that I can get done and be finished. And that completely taking away their environmental and social opportunity. So that reaction is, no, I'm not going to do that. I have a bath at 10 p.m. So we are forcing our own understanding of it. So that person says no, they get angry, they start shouting because the person is getting angry and they're pushing them in, and you're having this massive breakdown consequence. And actually, if you start to understand the person, you start to recognize their agency, then you start to change your language. And that behavior suddenly no longer seems challenging in any way, but seems very reasonable. And we're going to change the communication style that we use in order to work with that person and help them. So behaviors that can challenge. Think about the context of that person. Another good example I often talk about is sleep. So if someone came into my room and it was dark and they grabbed my shoulder and woke me up, I'd turn around and I would probably either scream or I'd lash out and try and punch them. And I'd be like, there's a stranger in my room. Terrified because I've just woken up, I'm feeling confused, it's dark in the room, and I get that. If someone had did that, they would be seen as angry or aggressive, and that label would stick with them. But actually, that person needed a gentle light to go on, the person to stand back, the person to be in visual sight, the person to very gently and quietly talk to them until they woke fully. And that person would wake and have a big smile. So the idea of behavior is so important about context. Now, some of the big ones that we see often in the work of the Nest that we do across Devon is refusal. And that doesn't have to be refusal to wash, it can be refusal anything. Thinking about agency and control, so I'm refusing to do this. It could be sundown, and sundown is a symptom that's very, very well known, I believe, but if not, it's a common symptom in dementia where somebody in the twilight period of the day, around 3 to 5 in the afternoon, gets a heightened level of confusion. Very common in dementia and something we have to recognize and manage. Hygiene, we've talked about. Apathy, just not willing to get out of bed. Orientation, not knowing where I am, what day it is, what town I'm at. I should be at home. I've got to go home, actually. My mum's waiting for me. I've got to go home. I'll see you soon, or I've got to go home. Pacing around, shouldn't ever use the word wandering, but pacing or moving without any design purpose that we can see. Anxiety, agitation, and repetition. That consistently saying the same thing again and again and again and again. So very, 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 very rarely do we see anger and aggression. actually, very rarely. Later, less common, we see some hallucination, depression, disinhibition, things like that. But we work very hard at this to recognise, and that's where you get the difference between professionals and sort of activity or day clubs. It's recognising how you've got to think about that person's behaviour in their context, and therefore meet them in that context. Right, not so relevant, but just in case you came across a situation in which there was behaviour that can be challenging, it's always important to learn. There's always there's a process in which we try and learn and recognise that behaviour. We use an ABCD process. So that's A is, what happened beforehand. So why did this situation happen? What might have been the triggers? B, what happened? What behaviour actually occurred? Was it, anxiety? Was it rushing off? Was it what happened because of that behaviour? What changed due to that? And then what can we debrief about? What might we learn from that? How would we de-escalate? How would we work together to ensure that person is well supported and it doesn't happen again? Or if it does, we're better prepared. So in every single challenge behaviour that can challenge, we're thinking about those A, B, C, D. And I sometimes talk about having a kit bag of tips, small tips to help. And one of them is resetting the situation. So recognizing the short-term memory, so that's anything between 10 seconds and 1 minute, has been impaired. So somebody's understanding of a situation is quite short. So if someone gets upset or gets very confused or gets very anxious, then you're, by leaving the room, moving out of for several minutes and then coming back in the room with a massive smile and lots of laughter and talking about something completely different, can reset and re-switch the situation. So it's recognizing that. But anyway, as I said, tips and things in the other training day. So just to summarize it, so the first part was about the idea of what we recognizing early signs of dementia, and then what is the early signs of dementia, and recognizing those things that we can do to maintain our pathway. And the second part was around behaviors that can be challenging. And I didn't want to go into too much detail because there's lots of behaviors that can challenge. But recognizing the core of the fact that that person's context in which they live in can be different and can be quite badly impaired by the situation, by the biology, by the psychology. And we need to shift our perception rather than expect them to shift their perception. So, just to leave some time for questions. So so in conclusion, this is a neurodegenerative disease, and I use that term very, very clearly. It is just like cancer or cardiology or cardiac disease. It is a disease. It affects a very small number of people, not the large numbers that we necessarily say. Even into your late 90s or mid 90s, we're looking at only around 40% of people diagnosed with dementia. However, with early active engagement and good professional support, then we can live happily and fully. We really can change that pathway. And I think too often the message has been the opposite, and too often we believe that actually there's nothing we can do, and we just sit at home and accept that diagnosis rather than challenging it and bring that. So I always like poo. I always start with the end of the poo. So he said, what day is it? Ask poo. It's today, Squeak Piglet, my favourite day. So, well, no one can change the outcome. With the right support, we can change the journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was clear to me. I don't know much about the Nest clinic. It's down the road, and you've got a lovely position. But how many of you, and how are you funded, and what's your purpose?
Yeah. So as I said, I am passionate about this. I'm the founder. I've worked in this. I set up this Nest group 10 years ago now to help families all over Devon, and we work across And I work with the NHS really closely to design the strategy for dementia. And I do a lot of talks like these. And I launched the Nest Exmouth, which is on Withercoombe Village Road, opposite Fear Park, on the corner with Gypsy Lane. And the design for that is to help families. And that's through advice, through courses, through respite, through daycare, through active mind. So one of the things we're doing at the moment is something called a 10-week course that helps keep your brain active. I just did it with Exeter u3a group, and we're doing another one in Exeter. That's all about tips and habits that we can form to maintain our brains. We do courses, which I talked about, dementia courses. But at the heart of what we do, we try and help families with the respite and support with someone living through this. So feel free, I've got lots of info flyers to get in touch at all. I should also say, just it's a weird thing. I often bring games with me because it's amazing how the children's games can be redesigned and recreated for memory, for our age, for the older adult things. So I take simple children's games and we'll use them to improve and change our minds. But anyway, we're on Withercoombe Village Road. I'm Jonathan, and I'm just here to help. So feel free to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions?
Thank you. That was a superb talk. I've really benefited by seeing that, and you spoke very clearly about an issue that affects so many families. Very few of us don't know someone who's been affected by it. We have a website, and following your last talk, I put a video on our latest news section, which I hope you look at every week. And a very good talk by Dr. Professor Maria Gregg, and he talked about the fitness gap, which I commend everyone. But really, I wanted to know how this could be followed up. Are there any particular resources, or where could we go for further information? And we're certainly happy to post that on our latest news section to help promote the good knowledge that we've imparted.
So I would argue, because I did my last talk on MCI, and I'd say there's two pathways and two things. There was those who are saying, right, I want to stay active and fit, and I want to hold my mind good. And there are multiple ways in which you can do it yourself. And depending on whether you're technologically minded and comfortable with what we call apps and brain gyms, then there is a series of different apps that can help to improve and support our brain. But equally, there is some about helping to form healthy habits. It's something that I sort of do a little talk about and teach about as well. And that's for those who are healthy and well and just want to stay strong. And then the other side of it is the person who actually has subjective cognitive decline or a recognized decline. And they, as I said, have a slightly different pathway. And that's actual consciously thought through pathway. So in answer to how do we continue from here, more than happy to sort of give u3a some just tips on online training, exercise routines, a one-pager on how to stay mentally fit. More than happy to give you that you can post. If you know someone or if somebody has got conscious decline, that takes a little bit more planning, and that might require a sit down with me. And depending where they are, it's either that I give you tips on what to do, and you go off and do them, or you come and join a course and we do a 10-minute course or both things. So there's a one-pager that I can share with you, or there's a sort of a slightly more complicated plan that would need me sitting with you a bit longer.
We can come and work with you.
So you don't have to go. You don't have to go through GP at all. And if there's, I'd love to teach GPs. The GPs obviously deal in acute. So if you're not acute, they're going to say, "Well, I'll come back in a year," because at the moment you're okay. And actually, we need to be thinking right. That's part of the dementia strategy that's coming out next year.
I have a small tip. I'll do that first. It's the shopping list. Right yourself a pictures as you do, even if you take pictures. But my question was at the beginning, when you said the brain can repair itself. Does that work effectively as it would have done in its original context? Does it take its time to repair and will not quite be the same, or can it really adapt completely?
So I in September, I showed you a lovely diagram. I showed you a lovely diagram that talked to this. And I took it out because I thought, well, I told you this in September, so I probably shouldn't repeat myself. But effectively, back in September, I talked about your brain being like an air traffic control system, which is very efficient. It speaks locally. So, so if I need information, I will deal with it just in a local area. Within that area. And then if I want to speak to someone in the top right-hand corner, I'm going to send the information to what we call a hub in our brains, a particularly strong. A bit like if I wanted to go from Norwich to New York, I first have to go to Heathrow, change at Heathrow, and then get the big plane across to New York. Your brain works in a similar way, so it works locally. And information is passed around in a very local way until I need something from the other side of the brain, and then I'm going to send it just locally, and that hub is going to do the information for me. Very efficient. So the good news on that is that local information, if one neuron breaks in the local area, then there are 10 others that can do the same thing. And it's not to say that they don't need practice, they don't need conscious work, but they can do it fairly quickly and fairly easily, things like that. However, if a hub gets damaged by Alzheimer's or protein or something like that, then that can't be replaced, right? Because it's so big and so important, and it deals with such large information that I can't easily repair that. So what you often see with dementia is a sort of, occasionally they go into hospital and you see a sudden decline, or you see a change in their language, which is quite noticeable. And that means that actually there's been some major damage within a particular hub, which is causing that, and I can't repair that, unfortunately. But I can repair local work, and I can repair that quite quickly into your side. But it does need work, it does need conscious thought, it does need stimulation, it does need all those sorts of things. So yeah, it depends what damage.
Jen to the back.
I have a thing called an acquired brain injury, which was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. Now, I was told at the time that the chances of dementia would probably increase because of the brain injury. Is that, I mean, it feels a bit like that. I get the same, there's sort of memory problems reoccurring that when I was about 50, I could find ways around it. But whether I'm just getting too old and lazy and not looking hard enough, but you almost get the impression, well, yeah, maybe a bit too old to get around these problems. But is there an actual correlation between brain injury and dementia?
Yeah, sorry. Simple question is yes. So, unfortunately, there is a correlation between brain injury and dementia, and obviously the obvious one, not even acquired brain injury, but just repetitive brain injury. Everyone knows about the 1960s football players that have all gone on to have dementia, unfortunately, due to repetitive brain damage. So there is, but there's also, if we turn that on its head, we can try and look at it more positively and say, actually, I know some of the techniques. I've had brain injury in the past. I use techniques in which that have helped me, and I recognise that I can see signs, and therefore I'm going to act, sort of thing, rather than somebody who's never had any work and they need to, and it comes upon them. So, and to answer your second question, am I too old and is it too late to try and come up with ideas? I'm an optimist. I forever believe that we can keep going. I think, as I said, there is no golden bullet. There is no magic. We know that we have damaged it, and I can't get that damage back. All I can do is think of the future. And I like the quote. I like this quote. So this quote is by William Wordsworth, and it says, "Life is divided into three terms: that which was, that which is, and that which will be. Let us learn from the past to profit by the present, and from the present to live better in the future." So we can only deal with what we can try and change for the future, and that means trying to maintain what we do have, or things like that. And that goes back to those three ideas that I said at the beginning.
Okay, we're at, oh, one more.
Hi, what do you think the position of AI will be, artificial intelligence, because we're literally into another universe.
Yes, yeah.
And I would have thought AI, I don't know how it would be applied, could make an incredible difference.
That's a very topical question, because actually I have two hats, I should say. I am very, very involved in the idea of AI being able to try and help us. And I am doing a pilot at the moment, which everyone or anyone is welcome to join, which uses a piece of technology called Eve. And Eve can talk to you, she can remind you about things, she can help you to keep busy or keep active or keep from loneliness. And Eve is an AI. And we piloted AI to see if it could capture early signs of cognitive damage. So what we wanted Eve to do is be able to run a very quick test and say, yes, your semantic fluency is not so good, there's some early signs, why don't you do something? And that's the research that Exeter University is heavily involved in. They just got a £50 million grant on this. So in answer to your question, AI will definitely radically change the way we manage it. We're doing it right this second. We're working with an AI tool called Eve at the moment, who is designed to sort of be a companion piece. But we're a little bit further away from being able to get AI to be able to diagnose or assess cognitive change, because that's very complicated. But I think it will change very soon. Yeah.
Okay, we need to wrap it up now. Some better weather. All right, it strikes me then, the message that any of us who are looking after grandchildren through the summer are probably getting a really good benefit from it. The other thing I would say is, if you're going to take anything away from this day, then go and look for one more u3a group.
Yes.
Because that can only be a good thing.
Yes, here.
So thank you very much, everybody. We're back here on July the 10th, and I believe the speaker is from the Woodland Trust. Thank you very much, everybody.